Welcome to Buddha's in Your Landfill. It's Saturday morning, and you can hear the cat crying. I locked her out, but you can hear her through the doors. And so we're going to continue while I compulsively throw up this hairball of my story. And we'll see where it goes. I had to laugh this morning and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. But I write on Facebook, as you know, and so I was answering a Quora question, and the question was, how do you know the path you tread will lead to enlightenment or a loony bin? And so, I wrote an answer on that, but then I realized, well, I'm doing that now. Telling this story is basically the story of a loony bin, and I didn't know whether I was mad or sane, and so I want to kind of like tell this story of my own path because it does have a universal relevance to your path, because we're all on a path, and there are certain fundamental forces in our path that are the same. And the one I wanted to talk about today, which kind of like ties this together, well, before I pull up that, let's pick up where we were yesterday, in case you're just dropping in. So yesterday we were looking at the 1969. We were living on a houseboat in Miami. I had a job teaching in the high school down there, and I had to leave because I could not teach from my heart, so I was in a terrible conflict with the institution. So I left, got a job as an ambulance attendant, and decided I wanted to be a minister. Went to the Richmond Presbyterian Seminary, and after they reviewed my application, they couldn't swallow me either, so they kicked me out. And then I got a job at Zuni School for Retarded, and got fired from there for integrating the local church. And we went to Hope House in Norfolk. So that's where we left off yesterday in the story of the exile from the garden. So we pick up at Hope House, which was we were there for 2 years, and it was an idyllic kind of place because it was a foundation. It was a home for adult retarded, created by the parents who wanted them to be taken care of when they could no longer take care of them. So we were house parents, and we had an expense account, and we could do what we wanted. So it was a big family. With 8 adult retarded and adults, and a mix of all kinds of. If there was an open bed, we might get somebody just out of the juvenile detention home, or kicked out of a home for violent behavior, and the psychiatrist would put him in there. So it was kind of like a catch-all, but it was a family, and we had our 2 children. Our daughter was born there, and. We go shopping. We had a van, and we go shopping, and it was like a crazy place with all these people filling up baskets. It was a lot of fun. And but anyway, I heard the call. I could not resist the call of my heart and the sinkhole that I fell into, as you recall, and go back to the 1968. I fell into the sinkhole of abrupt and radical awakening. And when that closed up, it left me with this call to adventure, this call of the heart. So I heard the call of the heart, and a friend of mine in Cleveland had a yoga teacher, and I respected this friend, so I knew I could, if I couldn't go into Christianity, I would go east, young man, and I would go into yoga and become a yoga teacher. So that I went to Cleveland, and it was a Native Yoga Society, and in the 70s, everybody had an Indian guru, And the master and the Indian master for the Light Yoga Society was Swami Rama from Hardwar up in Kashmir. And so I went to meet Swami Rama at a home in Pennsylvania. And when you go to meet a master, an enlightened being or a master, there's this, for me, it was like going to see a movie star. It was like there was there was no give and take of personality. It was this, and so when I walked in to see Rama, he was dressed in white. He was about the size of my father, olive skin like my father, and I just immediately bowed. I just surrendered. I just gave it up right there, the whole thing. I just gave the whole catastrophe of my life, the whole thing. I gave it to him. Bam. It was just a spontaneous surrender. He kind of like patted my head and said, okay. So, that afternoon, on the way to some tea in the garden, I learned to have afternoon tea. And while we were walking along, the hologram, like you saw I first saw one in Star Wars, the hologram came out of him, and it was my father. And it was kind of like he was there and I was here, and it was kind of like hovered right there, and then it went back into him. And I asked him, what that meant, and he didn't answer. I guess like you'll find out. And so a lot of my life has been trying to understand what that was so real. I mean, it wasn't fantasy. I mean, this was a powerful phenomena that was kind of like a Zen cone to me. What does this mean? So most of my life I've been still unraveling the meaning of that. And looking back on it now today, as I look at this path to the loony bin, or enlightenment, we don't know which, the theme, the thread that tied these decades together was atonement with the Father. My own father was a military or Navy, he was at sea all the time, and he was emotionally wounded and had no way of relating to me except passing on his wound to me. So that I was always in search of atonement with my physical father, and now I met a spiritual father, and there is a transference, I believe, and the search for the atonement with my physical biological father and the spiritual father became one path. And then I began to realize too that that the Father is, and Joseph Campbell helped me with this. The Father is a metaphor for the world. So the way we relate to our biological father, when we leave the home and leave the house of the Father, we relate to the world as the Father. So the Father then becomes kind of like a metaphor for the world, and we still maintain that conflict and that yearning and that desire for union and atonement with the world in the same way we wanted it with our physical father. So the search goes on, but it's now, instead of in the household that we grow up in, the world is our household. But the same pain, the same wound is there. In there's a phrase in Christianity, I think it was in a hymn, called the happy fault. The welcoming of this fault, this wound that won't heal. This wound that won't heal is in mythology. It's in the romance of the Grail and the Fisher King, and it's in Christ with the lance cut in his side, the wound that won't heal. And then there is a search for the Philosopher's Stone, the Holy Grail, the grace, the atonement that will heal the wound that cannot heal. So there's this mythological element going here. But getting on with my path of the 80s, so I went to see Rama, and I became part of the Light of Yoga Society for a few years. And Rama died before I even came up there. I mean, we were at Hope House, and I went up to meet him, and I remember this. I was conflicted about whether I should I uproot my whole life from Hope House in Virginia, pack up my family, and go to Cleveland in this mad leap, this mad act, you see. But just to connect this, one of my favorite movies and movie gurus of the 60s was Zorba the Greek. And one of the things Zorba said was, a man needs a little madness unless he will never cut the rope. And then recently we saw Avatar. And when Jake Sully caught in the conflict between the two worlds, he made the insane act, and he said he leaped on the back of the last shadow. And he said that was an insane act, So this leap of madness. So to me, this going to Cleveland, uprooting what little life I had down there and the family and everything in Blackstone, and going to Cleveland was a mad act. And I didn't know what to do. So one afternoon we had tea at a house where Rama was. This was the last time I saw him. And he mixed my tea for me with milk and sugar, like the English do. And he gave me the tea. And when I left the house and I was going home, I suddenly fell into this sinkhole of absolute peace, the peace that passes understanding. I was back in that sinkhole of 1968 of absolute peace and center in the world. And I knew it was okay to come to Cleveland and begin this crazy path. So I did. And in a few years, Alice Christensen, who was the yoga teacher there, would not give me the credentials I wanted to become a yoga minister. See, I'm combining these things. And the commercial that is the metaphor for that for that aspect of my life was when there was a big group. So this yoga society was to create yoga teachers. It was kind of like they felt there was kind of a lot of ego in it, but it was kind of like we're the Cadillac of the yoga societies, and we're going to create these yoga teachers and go out and change the world. You see, so it was kind of evangelical in that way. It was kind of like a yoga Liberty University. And I'd not made that connection before. But so anyway, they're having a group teacher where all the yoga students are the future teachers, and I get ready to go over there, and Alice turns and says, "Oh, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet." And so it was kind of like the Charlie the Tuna commercial, if you remember that. You're not ready, Charlie, for the tuna factory. So anyway, I became to be dissatisfied. I was not getting. So we went back to Virginia, and I ended up driving a meat truck. I couldn't get a job. So here I was, the only vegetarian meat truck driver in the world, I was sure. And I began to do battle with, I got a Big Mac attack, and cigarettes came back, and I lost my yoga, the whole thing, and I was throwing the cigarettes out with one hand, out of the car with one hand, and buying them with the other hand. And if I ever battled the devil before, it was that period for sitting in my truck, fighting my desires and the question, what do you really want to do? And so when I really asked that question, and we all have to ask this question to the heart, what do you really want? What do you really want to do? Because the mind is going, oh, I can't do this or that or this or that or that. The mind's going, wow, 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 wow. The heart knows. So you ask your heart, what do I, and then to answer that heart and to do what it says is always going to be a mad act. You don't know if it's going to the loony bin or to enlightenment. You don't know. You don't know. There's no way to know. But you act. So I asked, as soon as I answered my heart, we packed up and I took the family, the wife was teaching, went back to Cleveland to pick up this crazy path, and which again is the golden thread out of the labyrinth, if you remember that mythology of the Theseus and the Minotaur we were talking about. And all of this is part of that path. And so I came back and I got a job in these retarded institutions, and got fired from them. because I would come up with these creative programs. I thought they were creative, but they didn't fit. So it was always the institution would never allow me to be my spontaneous self. I could not make myself fit into the role of the institution, which was part of my battle with the Father. If you notice the battle with the Father and the Son, the Father, at least in my battle, the Son wants the Father to recognize his individuality, and the Father, my Father anyway, would squelch any attempt to be my natural self. So there was always this conflict, and I would go home, and maybe he'll recognize me and speak to me directly, but no, it was always, you're not ready yet for the tuna factory. So anyway, so I end up, I left the Light of Yoga Society. I'm back in Cleveland, and I hear the chanting of the Siddha Yoga and Swami Muktananda, who in the 70s was a huge, big guru that traveled and created ashrams of Siddha Yoga all over the world. So I became a devotee of Swami Muktananda because basically he said you could be a center leader, and I felt like this. I want to be a Siddha Yoga center leader, which was kind of like being a minister in a church, kind of. It was that kind of. I can fulfill that dream to be a minister, or the son of, and a minister again, or the priest is the Son of God. I remember my father telling me. I hope you don't mind that I jump around a little bit, but all the dots connect. I remember my father telling me, with pride, that the senior naval officer in a foreign port is the direct representative of the President of the United States. So when you're in a foreign port and the senior officer on a ship, or all the ships, is a direct representative, and what he does is the will of the United States. There's a direct representative. And you notice with the naval officer, there's gold on the hat, there's gold on the epaulets, on the shoulders, gold on the buttons, on the hilt, the sword. What is that? That represents the gold of the sun when it comes down and it drips on the naval officer, who is a direct emissary of the president. And so in the mythic sense, the minister or priest is a direct emissary is the Son of God, and a direct emissary of God himself on earth. So all these mythological things work in our psyche, when we don't really understand the connections, but they're very powerful images. So anyway, Muktananda made me, I could be a center leader and so in Cleveland we were for a couple of years. And during all this time, not to mention my getting fired from the institutions and the meat truck and all that, I got divorced from my wife, and then we got remarried when I found my center. I don't have to get into it now, but I had a very powerful centering experience in Muktananda's ashram, and I knew it was okay, that it was right to get for us to get remarried. So we got remarried in a great big ashram wedding, and we became center leaders in Cleveland. And people were coming to the house, and we were Siddha Yoga Center and all that. And I found my center. But I felt like, geez, I really need to get a PhD. There's something more. There's a limitation here. There's something more. So I'll go to India, to Muktananda's ashram at Ganeshpuri in India. And there I'll get my PhD, So if you ever read the book Eat, Pray, Love, the ashram in that book was Ganeshpuri, and the guru there was Muktananda, and he died in 1981, and Guru Mai took over the center. But I had anyway. So we went to India for 6 or 7 months, and when I left, it was on my birthday, December 17th, December 15th, and Muktananda. I had some wooden sandals that I bought in Bombay, and for my center, and we were going to go down temporarily. We were going to leave India and go to Blackstone. So I had my guru sandals, and he blessed them and put stuff all over them, you know, for my center. And he gave me a hat. Baba was known as the guru of the hat, Swami of the hats, because everybody would give him a hat, and then he would give it to somebody else. So he just recycled the hats, but he always had on a hat. So he gives me this hat on my birthday, you know, and he gives it here, and he pulls it down, and pulls it down like that, you know, and he says, it's going to be cold where you're going. It's going to be cold there. So I had my hat, and we come to Blackstone. We spent all of our money. We sold our house in Cleveland, spent the money on India, and I bought a VCR recorder, and that was big then. I mean, it was a big old Panasonic VCR recorder, because centers were playing videos of the guru, you know. So you had to have a video recorder player in order to play the tapes of Siddha Yoga, you know. So I think that thing cost $800, and it was it was all made out of metal. It looked like it was made in America. But so we had that, and so I came to Blackstone with my hat, and I was going to bring my center with it, you see. My center was not my true center. It was dependent. My center that I had discovered was dependent upon the structure of Siddha Yoga, you see. So it's kind of like being a minister whose center is dependent upon your church. Like if you're a Presbyterian minister, your center and authority is dependent upon the Presbyterian church and the credentials that you've acquired and the whole structure. So if the church were to disappear, so would your center, you see. So my center was dependent upon this external system. So a year after we leave India, Muktananda dies. And I remember the grief and the loss of center then. There's nothing for people in a yoga system. When the teacher dies, there is a great grief and a hole that opens up, because everyone is like the hub of the wheel is gone. All the spokes fall apart. They've lost their center, you see. So there was a great death. And I knew I was in trouble when we were going to stay here in this house right here. And this was, my wife's mother was here, and she grew up in Blackstone. And so I put Baba's picture on the wall, and she looked at that and says, boy, you can't put that picture up here. And I knew that that my center went like, you see. And I looked in the black phone, so we can talk about this tomorrow, but for the 80s, I'm in Blackstone, and Blackstone at that time was like, for me, was like a cemetery where there was a headstone that said, here lies Tilly's husband. Rest in peace. I had no center. And there is really, this is a very important idea, this feeling of center, because we're always losing it and trying to get it back. Anger is a loss of center. Even in politics today, all the anger comes from a death. Anger is a grieving process, and the grieving comes from a loss of center, or a loss of your place in life, or a loss of what you depend upon. It's like your placemat, the placemats of the table of the Last Supper. The placemats have been taken away or removed or shaken up, you see. Shaken, so there's a loss of center, and this creates a grief response. First there's denial, oh no, I haven't lost it, and then there's a realization that you have lost it, and then there's the anger. Because when we lose the center, we're vulnerable. You see, the heart is exposed. I have no bearing, I'm vulnerable to the world and to the attacks of the world, and the heart is exposed. So immediately anger rushes in and says, I have not lost my center. My anger is my center, you see. And in the anger, we restore center because we feel like we're doing something, that we're alive, and that we have a power again, you see. But that too is a false center. So anyway, I didn't, the anger can go in two ways, or the grieving can go in two ways. First there's denial, then there is the awareness that you have lost your center, and it will go either into depression or anger, you see. And so I went into depression. But anyway, we'll get into that. So I wanted to share this loony bin, and actually, you know, this mad act of coming out here live and exposing myself, you see, to this people in Blackstone. My friends are all on here, and you know, I don't know who is watching this. So this is really in a you know, a mad act. Why should I explain that? My family saying, I hope he doesn't say anything on Facebook that'll embarrass me. You know, you know, this crazy guy, you know. So what, there is something, even myself, I've looked back on my past as being a mistake, you know. But it's not a mistake. Nobody's a mistake. Your story's not a mistake. But if you look at it from a particular way, you'll feel it's a mistake, that you should have done differently, that you did wrong, these were crazy acts. No, there's no madness, you know. But when you ask the question, what do I really want? The answer is going to be crazy. And I'll see you tomorrow.